Stop everything for a second, because what happened over the last 3 days was not a joke post. It was not a caption. It was not another throwaway Instagram shot that trends for 12 hours and dies quietly in the algorithm. What 50 Cent just did to Rick Ross is the single most savage act of psychological warfare hip-hop has produced this year, and by the time we finish walking through every layer of it, you are going to understand why grown men who have been rich for 20 years are suddenly terrified of their own camera rolls. And look, before we open this thing up, I need one small thing from you, because we're about to dissect the loudest crack in a rapper's public image that this culture has seen in a long, long time. Every like on this video is not just support for the channel. It is a vote that says fake luxury flexes do not get a free pass anymore. One click, one message. And if you hit subscribe on top of it, welcome to the front row, because this story is moving fast and the next chapter could drop before the weekend is over. Now let's get into it, because the truth about where Rick Ross is standing right now is a lot shakier than the marble floors he keeps filming on. Here is the setup, and I need you to really sit with this, because the smaller commentary pages are already getting it completely backwards. They're telling you 50 Cent attacked Rick Ross out of nowhere. They're telling you the Airbnb accusation fell out of the sky. That is not what happened. That is not even close to what happened. Rick Ross loaded this weapon himself. Rick Ross handed 50 Cent the ammunition, the angle, and the green light, and 50 Cent being 50 Cent, he did exactly what he has done for 2 straight decades. He waited, he aimed, and he fired one single post that is still echoing across every hip-hop timeline on the internet right now. So, let me set the table the right way, because if you do not understand the moment Rick Ross created, you will never understand the ambush 50 Cent walked into with both hands already on the trigger. Rick Ross just released his 12th studio album, a project called Set in Stone, and the first week numbers that came back were not the numbers a man of his stature wanted the world to see. By the reported industry data, Set in Stone debuted at number 39 on the Billboard 200, moving somewhere in the neighborhood of 19,000 album equivalent units in its opening week. 19,000. For a rapper who spent his entire career building a larger-than-life brand around wealth, empire, and dominance, a chart position buried down in the 30s is exactly the kind of number your enemies screenshot and keep in a folder for a rainy day. And 50 Cent, being the man 50 Cent is, has never once met a rainy day he was not already holding an umbrella for. He had the screenshot. He had the angle. He was waiting. But here is where the story actually starts to breathe, because Rick Ross was not willing to sit quietly and let a number 39 debut become the headline of his year. Rick Ross came out swinging. Rick Ross argued that first-week album sales are not the correct metric for measuring a real boss in 2026. Rick Ross argued that if he wanted to chase inflated opening week numbers, he could have played the same tired games the rest of the industry plays. Rick Ross argued that the real scoreboard is not 7 days of streams. It is the property, the investments, the businesses, the lifestyle a man like Rick Ross has spent decades constructing brick by brick. And to prove that point, to seal that argument, to slam the door in the face of every commentator calling Set in Stone a flop, Rick Ross did what Rick Ross always does. Rick Ross turned the camera on his own mansion. He stood in front of a property and told the world, paraphrasing his energy, that the rappers criticizing him could not even show a palm tree in their front yard. He said the men running their mouths about first-week numbers could not display the smallest sliver of real estate to their audience. And then Rick Ross delivered the line that changed everything. He looked into that camera and declared the house behind him was a $100 million house. 100 million. That is the number Rick Ross chose to put on the table. Not 50 million. Not 75. $100 million. And here is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath the Set in Stone numbers. First-week figures genuinely do matter less than they used to. The industry knows it. Catalog value, touring, sync, brand partnerships, ownership stakes, that is where real money lives in 2026. Rick Ross is not wrong about that, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But here is the part he cannot escape. Optics still matter more than ever. Because in an era where the music is harder to monetize, the image is the asset. The flex is the product. When your entire brand architecture is built on being the biggest boss, every public measurement of you gets graded on the boss curve. A number 39 debut is survivable for almost any other veteran artist. For the man who named himself after a kingpin, it becomes a headline. That is the tax on the persona. You do not get to sell the biggest life and then ask for a smaller scoreboard when the numbers come in. And the second that number left his mouth, the entire geometry of this feud shifted. That was the moment. That was the pivot. That was the exact second Rick Ross walked out of the safe zone and directly into the kill box, because 50 Cent did not respond by debating the album. 50 Cent did not argue about the Billboard chart. 50 Cent did not waste one single sentence on streaming figures. 50 Cent went straight for the property itself. In an Instagram post that has now been screenshotted, reposted, and dissected across every corner of the hip-hop internet, 50 Cent mocked Rick Ross for allegedly standing in front of an open house and calling it a $100 million mansion. And then 50 Cent dropped the sentence that turned this from a joke into a crisis. He accused the mansion Rick Ross was flexing of being available on Airbnb. Available on Airbnb. Let that sit in the air for a second, because that one sentence completely inverted the flex. That one sentence turned Rick Ross and his proof of empire into a possible proof of props. That one sentence converted an argument about generational wealth into a punchline that has been running on a loop for 3 straight days. Now I have to be careful here, and I want you to be careful too, because a lot of the smaller pages are running with this like it is a court verdict, and it is not. The Airbnb claim came out of 50 Cent's mouth. That distinction matters. According to everything circulating this week, Rick Ross has not publicly confirmed the accusation, and Airbnb itself has not commented on any alleged listing. So the strongest honest version of this story is not that 50 Cent proved anything. The strongest version is that 50 Cent accused Rick Ross of flexing a property he priced at $100 million and alleged that same property was listed for short-term rental. In 2026 hip-hop, accusations travel faster than facts, and the audience almost always forgets the difference. Think about how doubt actually works in the attention economy. A fact requires homework. A fact requires the audience to read, verify, compare sources, and hold 2 ideas in their head at once. A doubt requires none of that. A doubt is a single image plus a single sentence plus a question mark, and the human brain finishes the demolition on its own, for free, while scrolling in line at a coffee shop. That is why the strongest version of this story does not even matter to most of the timeline. The careful version, the one that says the listing is unconfirmed and Airbnb has not commented, that version loses to the loud version every single time. 50 Cent has understood this longer than almost anyone in entertainment. He is not trying to win an argument. He is trying to plant a splinter. And a splinter, once it is under the skin, does the work all by itself. And here is the crack inside the crack. Even if the property really was listed somewhere, that alone would not prove Rick Ross does not own it. Wealthy owners rent their own mansions on Airbnb every single day. That is a real, verifiable business model. So the Airbnb angle is only truly devastating if the deeper claim underneath it is true, which is that Rick Ross was standing inside a home he does not actually own while filming that flex. And that right there is the question 50 Cent buried inside the joke like a blade inside a bouquet. Because 50 Cent understands something about the modern internet that most rappers still have not learned. In the age of Instagram, a doubt is more powerful than a fact. A doubt spreads faster. A doubt does not need receipts. A doubt does not need a court date. A doubt just has to be loud, and a doubt lives rent-free in the audience's brain for weeks. And 50 Cent has always been loud. That is the entire foundation of his playbook. Volume plus timing plus one perfectly placed image. That is the formula he ran against Ja Rule. That is the formula he has run against Rick Ross before. That is the formula he has run against half the industry for 20 years. And Rick Ross, of all human beings on this planet, knows that formula better than anyone, because Rick Ross has been on the receiving end of it more times than any artist in modern hip-hop history. And if you want the blueprint for what 50 Cent is doing right now, look at what he did to Ja Rule and Murder Inc. That takedown was not built on facts alone. It was built on repetition, mockery, and doubt, applied relentlessly until the audience could no longer hear the music without hearing the joke attached to it. 50 Cent did not prove Ja Rule was fake in a courtroom. He made it impossible to take Ja Rule seriously in a barbershop. That is a completely different weapon, and it is far more powerful. Because a court ruling can be appealed. A vibe cannot. Once the culture decides you are the punchline follows you into every room, every interview, every rollout, forever. That is the exact play being run on Rick Ross right now. The Airbnb line is not evidence. It is a label. And labels, once they stick, are almost impossible to peel off. But hold on, because if you think this story is about a house, you are reading it at surface level, and surface level is exactly where 50 Cent wants the casual audience to stay. Strip this whole thing down to the framework, and what you are actually watching is a war over the definition of success in 2026 hip-hop. Rick Ross answered being called a chart disappointment by redefining the scoreboard. His position, translated, is simple. Do not measure me by 1 week of numbers. Measure me by the empire. Measure me by the estates. Measure me by the palm trees. Measure me by everything a real boss accumulates outside the recording booth. And honestly, if you strip the rivalry out of it for 1 second, that is an argument a lot of veteran artists would quietly nod along with. Streaming numbers are unstable. Catalogs fluctuate. Property outlives platinum plaques. But here is the fatal flaw, and it is fatal. That argument only stands if the visuals stand. The moment the visuals become questionable, the entire argument collapses under its own weight, and that is exactly the pressure point 50 Cent found with one finger. 50 Cent did not say Rick Ross was wrong about first-week numbers. 50 Cent questioned whether the mansion Rick Ross used as his evidence was even real. That is not a joke. That is the entire redefined scoreboard being ripped off the wall and thrown back in Rick Ross and his face. If the mansion is not a $100 million mansion, if the mansion is not even his mansion, then everything Rick Ross argued about wealth over numbers falls apart inside a single Instagram caption. And once that argument falls, the number 39 debut of Set in Stone stops being a footnote and becomes the headline all over again. That is the domino chain 50 Cent built with one post. Take the exact image your opponent is presenting as proof of strength. Attach one small, perfectly placed question mark to it. Then step back and let the internet finish the demolition for free. It is a specialty. It is a signature. It is honestly 50 Cent's real craft outside the booth, and Rick Ross walked directly into it with the camera rolling. Rick Ross did not need to name a price. Rick Ross did not need to say 100 million. Rick Ross chose to say 100 million, and that number is the pin 50 Cent pulled the grenade with. If those two words never leave his mouth, this story does not exist. Now here is what the surface level accounts are missing, and this is the part one need you to sit with. Rick Ross versus 50 Cent is not a fresh story. This rivalry has been living, breathing, and mutating in the background of hip-hop for the better part of 20 years. And the reason this chapter matters so much is that both men have been running the same playbook against each other for 2 decades, only now the stakes have quietly migrated from music into money, from records into real estate, from bars into balance sheets, from mixtapes into mogul moves. Every time Rick Ross builds a public image around wealth, 50 Cent finds the loose thread and pulls it. Every time 50 Cent builds a public image around business empire, Rick Ross finds the ownership question and drives a truck straight through it. It is a mirror war. Both men are playing the exact same game with the exact same rules, and both of them know it. To understand why this round cuts so deep, you have to remember how long this war has actually been running. This is not a feud born on Instagram. This rivalry stretches all the way back to the late 2000s, back when the weapons were freestyle disses, courthouse skits, cartoon parodies, and radio station ambushes instead of captions and stories. Back then, 50 Cent attacked Rick Ross over his past, his persona, his credibility, everything. He built entire comedy campaigns around dismantling the image Ross was constructing. And Rick Ross did what Rick Ross has always done. He refused to fold. He kept the sunglasses on, kept the beard groomed, kept the wing lemon-peppered, and kept insisting the empire was real. That is the part people forget. These two have survived nearly 20 years of this. Lawsuits have flown. Families have been dragged into it. Millions of dollars of legal damage have been done on both sides. And neither man has ever once blinked first. That history is exactly why this week matters. When two people have been swinging at each other for 2 decades, they stop wasting energy on jabs. Every shot they throw now is aimed at the foundation. And do not forget, Rick Ross fired his own shot before any of this lit up. Rick Ross held up a ring, described it as his $1 million finger, and openly joked about what could happen if he ever got the chance to slap 50 Cent with that exact ring. The $1 million finger comment. That happened. Now, the second that clip hit the internet did what the internet always does. Half the comments treated it as a genuine threat. Half treated it as luxury comedy. The truth lives somewhere in between. Nothing in the reporting suggests Rick Ross was announcing an actual plan to physically confront anybody. It was performance. It was showmanship. It was Rick Ross being Rick Ross. But the underlying message was unmistakable. Even after all these years, Rick Ross refuses to let a 50 Cent insult hang in the air unanswered. Rick Ross refuses to hand 50 Cent the final punchline of any round. And the timing of all of this is genuinely wild, because Rick Ross is not just fighting one war right now. Rick Ross is simultaneously trading shots with Drake. Drake took aim at Rick Ross on the Iceman album, and Rick Ross fired back by calling Drake washed, accusing him of stacking underwhelming projects one after another. So Rick Ross is running two parallel wars at the same time. One against the biggest streaming force in modern music. One against the most thick-skinned, professionally petty businessman the genre has ever produced. That is not a light schedule. That is a man standing in the middle of a two-front conflict with two of the loudest names in the entire industry. And one more thing about the timing that cannot be ignored. All of this is landing while Rick Ross is mid-rollout, mid-Drake conflict, and mid-reinvention, all at once. Most artists get to fight on one front at a time. He is fighting on three, and he is choosing to escalate on all of them simultaneously. That is either the confidence of a man who knows his foundation is real, or the stubbornness of a man who cannot let any shot go unanswered, and honestly, after 20 years, it is probably both. That is the paradox at the center of Rick Ross. The same refusal to bend that kept him standing through the worst stretches of this rivalry is the same impulse that keeps handing his opponents new targets. The armor and the ammunition are made of the exact same metal. The Shreveport angle deserves its own moment too, because it is the one piece of this story grounded in something concrete. 50 Cent's studio ambitions in Louisiana are real. The renderings exist. The local reporting exists. That is a genuine production play in a state that has been aggressively courting film and television money for years. So when Rick Ross says he has already seen the drawings, already been briefed, already had the concept discussed with someone in his circle, he is doing two things at once. On the surface, he is signaling openness. Underneath, he is signaling access. He is telling the audience and telling 50 Cent that nothing in that man's business world reaches the public without crossing the Rick Ross desk first. That is a power move disguised as a compliment. It says, I am not asking to join your table. I am informing you that I already know what is being served on it. And here is what makes this era of Rick Ross so strangely compelling. No matter who shoots at him, Rick Ross always redirects the conversation back to the same territory. Wealth, property, empire, longevity. He does not want to be measured by the album. He wants to be measured by the ledger. He wants the conversation dragged away from the streaming charts and toward the balance sheet. And that redirection is smart, because it plays to his strengths. But it is also exactly what keeps handing 50 Cent fresh targets. Every time Rick Ross brings the conversation back to wealth, he gives 50 Cent another visual to question, another price tag to challenge, another mansion to inspect, another lifestyle claim to poke a hole through. That is why 50 Cent keeps winning the surface rounds. Not because 50 Cent is right, not because 50 Cent has the receipts, but because Rick Ross keeps delivering him brand new ammunition wrapped in gold ribbon. Every flex is a target. Every dollar sign is a bullseye. And 50 Cent, being the marksman 50 Cent is, does not miss when the target is that big. But then, right when this whole situation looked locked into another endless cycle of insults and clapbacks, Rick Ross did something absolutely nobody on the hip-hop internet saw coming. And this is the part of the story that changes the entire shape of this rivalry going forward. This is the plot twist nobody drafted. This is the pivot nobody predicted. This is the moment the entire arc quietly shifted from combat to negotiation. Rick Ross opened the door to a business relationship with 50 Cent. Read that again slowly. Rick Ross opened the door to a business relationship with 50 Cent. It happened during an Instagram Live, when a fan asked him directly whether he would ever work with 50 Cent from a business perspective. In the middle of the loudest public exchange between these two men in years, in the middle of yacht jokes and mansion accusations and million-dollar finger threats, Rick Ross essentially said he was willing to listen. He pointed specifically toward 50 Cent's plans for a movie studio in Shreveport, Louisiana. He said he had already seen renderings and drawings connected to those studio ambitions. He claimed 50 Cent had even discussed the concept with a person close to him, meaning this was not new information landing on Rick Ross for the first time. He had already been briefed. And then Rick Ross said the line that quietly flipped the entire tone of a 20-year war. Paraphrasing his energy here, men of business do not discuss the past. New money, he said. And he would consider it. And notice the symmetry, because it is almost poetic. For years, 50 Cent has audited Rick Ross. Every watch, every car, every property, every wing of the empire gets inspected in public, one post at a time. Now Rick Ross has turned the same audit around. By offering to fund, rescue, or elevate the Shreveport project, he is quietly asking the exact question 50 Cent has built a career asking other people. If the empire is that solid, why would it need my money? If the television kingdom is that secure, why would the biggest boss in film need a cosign from the biggest boss in rap? Neither question has to be answered. Both questions only have to be heard. This is two men who studied each other for 20 years, finally using each other's favorite weapon at the same time in the same week, in front of the same audience. Now stop and really think about what that sentence implies. That is Rick Ross telling the world that a rivalry stacked with insults, lawsuits, viral clips, chart wars, and mansion accusations could potentially be shelved for the right business opportunity. That is a completely different philosophy from the one that has powered this feud for 2 decades. That is boardroom language, not booth language. That is a man swapping the microphone for a pen and a signature line. And Rick Ross did not stop at the live. He took the offer to his own Instagram story and stretched it even further. He called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He tagged 50 Cent directly. He wrote, in essence, that he could change 50 Cent's life. He positioned the offer as a chance for 50 Cent to sit at the Rick Ross table, not the other way around. His table. And that framing is not an accident. That framing is a signal. That framing is the flex hiding inside the olive branch. Because look at it carefully. Rick Ross is not saying, let us collaborate as equals. Rick Ross is saying he could rescue, elevate, or finance 50 Cent's next big move. After years of 50 Cent attacking his financial credibility, Rick Ross is now positioning himself as the man holding the checkbook. That is not a diss track. That is not a caption. That is a status flex wearing a handshake as a costume. That is winning an argument by refusing to have the argument. There is also a fan economy layer to this that nobody is talking about. These stories do not spread because of blogs anymore. They spread because of group chats. They spread because somebody screenshots the Airbnb line, drops it into a chat with no context, and 15 people who have never streamed set in stone suddenly have an opinion on a man's real estate portfolio. That is the distribution engine of modern rap beef. It is not radio. It is not even the blogs. It is the forwarded screenshot. And 50 Cent writes for the screenshot better than anyone alive. Short line. Big claim. Question mark energy. Perfectly cropped for a repost. Rick Ross, to his credit, just proved he can play that game too, because the business offer was engineered the same way. One line, one tag, one promise to change a rival's life. That is not a caption. That is a screenshot waiting to happen, and both of them knew it. And this is where the move becomes genuinely fascinating from a storytelling perspective, because you can read it in 2 completely opposite directions, and both readings are plausible. Read 1. Rick Ross genuinely spotted an opportunity. 50 Cent has spent years building one of the most influential television and film footprints in modern hip-hop. If he is truly raising capital for a studio in Shreveport, that is real money moving through a real production ecosystem. If Rick Ross believes he can inject capital, connections, or expertise into that pipeline, then setting personal history aside is not weakness. It is arithmetic. That is how mogul-tier decisions actually get made. Grudges do not build studios. Capital builds studios. And Rick Ross is a man who understands capital. Read 2. Rick Ross is trolling at an altitude nobody else in the game can even breathe at. Instead of dissing 50 Cent, he is publicly offering to save him. Instead of insulting him, he is publicly offering to fund him. Instead of attacking him, he is publicly offering to change his life. That is the business equivalent of winning a shouting match without ever raising your voice. And in some ways it cuts deeper than a diss record, because a diss record leaves the door open for a response. A public offer to bail out your rival leaves the door open for something far messier. Silence. And in the 50 Cent playbook, silence is not neutral. Silence reads as defeat. So here is a genuine question for the comments, and I want real answers, not just team flags. Is the luxury flex officially dead? Because think about what this week proved. A $100 million mansion claim survived less than 72 hours before it got turned into a rental joke. A 2-decade reputation as the biggest boss got stress tested by a single sentence. If the biggest flexers of an entire generation can get their scoreboards flipped that fast, what chance does the next wave have? Are we watching the end of the era where rappers sell the lifestyle first and the music second, or is this just the cost of admission for playing at the mogul tier? I honestly do not think there is a wrong answer here, and that is exactly why the debate matters. And that brings us to the most dangerous fork in this entire road, because as of everything reported in this story, 50 Cent has not responded to the business proposal. That silence is doing more work than any sentence he could post. The internet is filling the blank with theories. Some fans swear 50 Cent is furious that Rick Ross flipped the tone. Some believe 50 Cent is quietly considering it, because above everything else, 50 Cent is a businessman. Some are convinced he is drafting the most brutal response of the entire feud at this very moment. Nobody knows. That is the whole point. That unknown is the fuel keeping the story burning. But the truly serious analysts need to lock in here, because the 20-year pattern of Rick Ross versus 50 Cent tells you one thing with absolute confidence. Peace never lasts long between these two. They have shown over and over that they can pivot from friendly conversation to full public warfare in a matter of hours. The reporting even references a recent moment involving Travis Scott and 50 Cent's former partner, known publicly as Cuban Link, which Rick Ross used as yet another opportunity to troll. So even if a business meeting happened tomorrow morning, there is zero guarantee the insults would stop by tomorrow night. That is the strange, unstable balance sitting at the center of this whole saga. These two men might be fully capable of doing business together while remaining perfectly comfortable humiliating each other in public. That contradiction is exactly what has kept this rivalry alive for 20 years. It refuses to be pure war. It refuses to be pure peace. It refuses to be pure comedy. It refuses to be pure business. It lives in the impossible middle, and both men clearly love it there. So game out the next move with me, because each path tells a completely different story. Path 1, 50 Cent jokes. A meme, a booking link, a photoshopped listing, and the classic era of the feud rolls on exactly as it always has. Path 2, he stays silent. And silence from the loudest man in the room would say more than any post, because it would mean the business offer actually landed somewhere real. Path 3, he counters. A public negotiation in front of the entire culture, two 20-year rivals conducting a deal in the comments section like it is a boardroom with glass walls. And Path 4, the scorched earth response, the one where he treats the offer itself as the insult and unloads everything he has been saving. Every single path is plausible. That is what makes this moment so rare. For the first time in years, nobody, not the blogs, not the stands, not the analysts, can tell you what happens next. Now zoom all the way out. Past the mansion. Past the Airbnb accusation. Past the yacht jokes, the $1 million finger, the Iceman shots, the Shreveport offer. And you start to see the argument this feud has actually been about the entire time. It is not the argument the surface pages are pushing. They think this is about clout. It is not. That is the surface. Underneath sits something much bigger, so walk out of this video with the following understanding. The mansion is a symbol. It represents the question now hovering over every mogul in modern hip-hop. What does real, verifiable, receipt-backed success actually look like in 2026? Rick Ross and his position is that music alone is not enough. An artist can chart, stream, tour, and dominate playlists and still fail to build lasting wealth outside the studio. That is why he keeps pointing at properties, ventures, and lifestyle. 50 Cent's response challenges the credibility of that visual empire. If the mansion claim can be questioned, the entire scoreboard Rick Ross drew on the wall gets erased with one caption. And Rick Ross flipped that same blade right back toward 50 Cent's chest, raising the ownership question about the television and film legacy 50 Cent built his mogul image on. If the ownership can be questioned, that empire takes the same dent the mansion just took. That is why this round is so evenly weighted. Both men landed a real hit. Both men opened a real wound. Both men, from opposite directions, are running the exact same argument. Do not tell us how successful you are. Show us what you actually own. And the ripple effect is already bigger than these two names. Every mogul-adjacent artist watching this week just got the same memo. The receipt era is here. The audience that used to accept the flex at face value now wants the paperwork behind it. The deed, the equity, the ownership stake, the proof. That shift did not start with this story, but this story is accelerating it because it showed everyone how fast the question mark travels once it is attached to a price tag. The next generation of rap bosses is watching this like a case study. Not in how to flex. In how to survive the audit that now comes standard with every flex. And that framework is going to outlive this round. That framework is going to shape the next decade of hip-hop wealth debates. Because the young artists coming up behind Rick Ross and 50 Cent are watching this exchange in real time, and they are learning that in 2026, a chart position is not a scoreboard. A mansion is not a scoreboard. A hit television show is not a scoreboard. The only real scoreboard is what you can prove you own when the cameras stop rolling. Everything else is set dressing. Everything else is theater. The rappers who bought mansions for Instagram are now being asked to prove the mansions are theirs. The rappers who claimed billion-dollar empires are being asked to open the books. The rappers who hung price tags on their lifestyles are being asked to justify those tags with something stronger than a caption. And every single one of them is watching these two originators of the mogul flex to see how they handle pressure when it comes from inside the culture. That is why the audience response to this round has been so intense. It was never just about Rick Ross. It was never just about 50 Cent. It is about the entire aesthetic of hip-hop wealth and whether the last 20 years of luxury flexing was built on real foundations or clever camera angles. So here's where we land. Rick Ross handed over the ammunition the moment he put the words 100 million on that mansion. 50 Cent lit the fuse the moment he said Airbnb. Rick Ross flipped the entire tone the moment he offered to change 50 Cent's life. And 50 Cent's silence right now is the loudest sentence in the entire feud. That is not a coincidence. That is a masterclass in how hip-hop wars actually operate in 2026. The music matters. The mansions matter. The receipts matter more. And whoever controls the next post, the next interview, the next appearance, or the next silence controls the story. Rick Ross controls the current beat, but 50 Cent controls the pause. And in this era, the pause is often more valuable than the punchline. So watch the next 48 hours closely, because the shape of whatever 50 Cent does next tells you exactly which season of this feud we are entering. If he answers with a joke, we are still in the classic era. If he answers with silence, we are entering the negotiation era. If he answers with a counter-offer, we are entering the business era. And if he answers with a full attack, we are entering the war era all over again. Now I want to hear exactly where you stand, because this one is genuinely split down the middle. Do you believe Rick Ross actually opened the door to a real Shreveport studio deal, or was the whole offer a surgical troll dressed up in a suit? Do you believe the Airbnb accusation was a legitimate exposure or a perfectly timed punchline aimed at a man standing in his own moment? And the biggest question of all, if these two ever actually shook hands and built something together, is that the ending nobody in hip-hop is ready for, or the ending both men have secretly been building toward for 20 years? Drop your take in the comments. I read them, and the sharpest one shaped the next breakdown on this channel, because this rivalry is nowhere near over, and the next move is going to reset the entire conversation. And listen, if you made it all the way to this point, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, because likes are how this channel keeps kicking doors open on stories the bigger platforms are too nervous to touch. Subscribe, because the next chapter of this saga is going to break before most of the hip-hop timeline even wakes up, and you do not want to be the one catching up. Turn on the notification bell so you are the first person in your group chat with the real breakdown instead of the recycled version everybody else runs with. And before you go, the full breakdown of the exact moment the set in Stone rollout started tilting is already sitting on this channel, and I promise it will change the way you look at every rapper claiming a first-week win from this point forward. Until the next round, keep your eyes on the receipts, keep your ears on the moves, and remember one thing. The man who owns the room never has to raise his voice louder than the man who rents it.